Welcome to The Vital Point. I'm your host, Jonathan Schecter. If you are interested in transformational work such as plant medicine, psychedelics, breath work, meditation, somatic practices, cold exposure, yoga, and more, then my friends, you are in the right place. Welcome to The Vital Point, the podcast that is for practitioners as well as people new to transformational work looking curiously for more information and guidance. So if you are new to this type of work, welcome. I'm your host, Jonathan Schecter. I am an integration coach and breathwork facilitator. I've also been meditating for about 20 years and do some mindfulness instruction as well. So this podcast brings you leaders in the fields of transformational work, whether that's psychedelics and plant medicine work, breath work, or a myriad of other types of modalities. And my goal with this podcast is to not only introduce you to new modalities and practices, but help spark your curiosity to go out and actually practice them. So I hope you enjoy today's episode of the show. Hi friends, Jonathan Schecter here. On this episode of the podcast, my guest is internal family systems coach Christine Dixon, known on Instagram as the_ordinary_sacred. Internal family systems is a type of therapy that treats the psyche and the individual as a collection of different parts, each with different roles, different emotions, different memories even, hence creating an internal family. And Christine does a much better job of explaining it than I am. Trust me. I really enjoyed this conversation because I find it a fascinating topic, and IFS, or parts work, as it's also known, has been really transformative in my own healing practice, especially when combined with somatic experiencing therapy. And one of the parts of the interview that I found the most fascinating was Christine said, curiosity is the opposite of judgment. And so within the context of IFS and parts work, we are getting curious about these different parts. We're not judging them. We're not shaming them. It's all about sitting with those parts and figuring out what their role is. And when we do that, it allows the situation to open. We can heal the things that sometimes these parts are protecting us from, shielding us from. And once that happens, those parts take on new roles within our lives. So we talk about that. We talk about the true self, which in the context of IFS is this part of us that's at our core and that's always there and is like whole and complete, and how that part interacts with the other parts, and so much more. So I hope you enjoy this episode of the Vital Point podcast with Christine Dixon. See people joining here. That's great. So welcome to the Vital Point podcast where we talk about all different types of transformational practices. And to me, the vital point is that we have to actually practice. These are things that are great to learn about, great to read about, but the real transformation comes from actually putting these different modalities, different teachings, different methods into practice. And my guest today is a great example of that. She is Christine Dixon, known here on Instagram as The Ordinary Sacred. And Christine is an internal family systems therapist. So Christine, welcome
Coach,
to...
yeah.
Oh, coach. Okay. All right. An internal family systems coach. So Christine, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
So I really wanted to have this conversation with you because even though I've only scratched the surface of IFS. It has been super transformational for me. And I
Hmm.
feel like it fits in with other modalities of healing and transformation so well. Like, for instance,
Hmm.
for me, I work with a somatic experiencing
Mm.
therapist, and she is able to weave in certain aspects of internal family systems into our work together. And I know
Mm.
talking with for instance, like Jamie Clements, the breath space, who is a breathwork
Hmm.
facilitator, who's also been a guest on the podcast. You know, he's talked about how transformational IFS has been for his work. And so I wondered if you could just give listeners, to begin, just like an overview of what IFS is.
Yeah, I would love to. I like to, when I describe IFS, I like to tell the story a little bit of how Dick Schwartz, the founder, how he developed it. I've probably heard him tell the story hundreds of times, and I always thought, oh, he's telling it again, but I realize it's the best way, I think, to explain it. So one thing I love about Dick Schwartz, he was a family systems therapist. So he worked with individuals in a family and kind of how they affected the system as a whole. And he was doing an outcome study with women with eating disorders. And something that I love that he did was something that I did as an educational therapist was he thought of his clients as his teachers. So, each person that's in front of us knows more about themselves and their history and their inner system than we possibly could,
Hmm.
right? So, as a facilitator, becoming an observer, a keen observer in the moment of that person and learning from them how to best help them help themselves is kind of what he did. So he was this just a scientist observing, and as he worked with these women with eating disorders, he would hear them use this language of parts, where they would say, I have a part of me, for example, that feels really deep shame and pain, and then another part kind of swoops in and has me binge eat so that I can numb the pain and feel better. But then another part comes in and criticizes me and says, you fat pig, you have no self control. How dare you do that again? And then the pain of that critical voice makes the shame parts come up again. And then the binge eating part comes in again. And it's just this constant cycle. So first he realized that, and he thought, "Ooh, maybe my clients have dissociative identity disorder or multiple personalities." But then as he observed himself, he realized, I I do this as well. And I always encourage people, if you really observe your own mind and you begin to notice the thoughts in your mind, you'll realize that you're not a mono mind, that you actually have often there's a dialogue or a whole conversation going on. Oh man, I really hate this person. I wish I could do this. Oh no, no, of course, but I couldn't because I need to be a good girl. Whatever. There's these different voices that come in, or these different parts of us. And actually understanding that helps us be able to hold, the both and or the all of we don't have to just side with one or the other. So that was the first thing, that was this understanding that we all have multiple parts within us, multiple that have different perspectives. And then, so since he was well, first of all, as he was doing that, he had this client that came in that had an eating disorder and also was cutting herself. So it was, having this severe behavior that he perceived as this very negative thing, understandably. And so he at first, like many modalities and many religions, government, parenting, everything, he tried to fight with it. He said, just stop it. Just stop doing this or else, or like we try to fight with our inner critic. We
Right.
say, just tell that inner critic to get out of here, or that kind of thing. So that's what he was doing. So for the whole hour, he fought with this cutting part and got it to say, finally, I will stop cutting her. But then the next week she came in and she had a gash down her face. And he just felt so defeated that he said he just fell into the chair and he said, I give up. Cutting part, you win. And he said that cutting part of her spoke and said, I don't want to win. And it was the first time that he was able to feel curious and to say, oh, what do you want? And that was when he began to listen to the part, and it explained this history that she had where she was sexually abused. And the cutting part came in to help her first express her rage that she couldn't express outwardly toward the person without being hurt, and also would help her numb and take her out of the pain of the situation and distract her with a different kind of pain. So he realized that this part, even though it had a harmful impact, had this very heroic intention. And so this was the first time he realized there are no bad parts, that every part is doing something for a reason, often to protect another part that's stuck in a moment of trauma or a moment of attachment wound, just something that was really distressing that it couldn't process. So he had that understanding. Oh, there are no bad parts. And so it doesn't work to fight them. The parts fight each other, right? But
Right.
but having that appreciation for them goes a long way. And then the final thing, one more thing that's really, really key to IFS is that because he was a family systems therapist, he was used to, being in a room with a family, and say he had a teenage girl in front of him, and the parents were standing behind him, and he realized that the father was giving dirty looks to her, and he would say, "Ooh, she's not going to speak if there's any judgment in the room." So he would ask the father to either go behind her or leave the room for a little bit so she could open up. So he would do this on the inside, where he would realize he's trying to talk to this part, but maybe there's a judgmental part or a fearful part present, and so this other part won't speak. So he would ask them, can you just give us some space? And there'd be one part, and then another part might come up, can you give us some space? And he would keep asking until, with one client, all these parts stepped back, and then suddenly this part emerged that was so calm and was just non-judgmental, confident, compassionate. He has these 8 C's that define this. And he asked the woman, what part is that? And she said, oh, it's not a part. It's just me. It's myself. And so he started calling this the self with the capital S. And at first he thought that she just had a lot of, a good upbringing and a good attachment, but he found out she had severe trauma growing up. And then as he worked with more and more clients, he found that this self was at the core of every single person. And that this self is the healing agent in the system. So as the therapist or the coach or the facilitator, like, our job is just to have the person allow these other parts to step back, and it's this self that will emerge and has the capacity to heal the protective parts and the parts that hold all the wounds. So it's a very hopeful system. Sorry if that was too long, but that's
No, it was beautiful. There's so much to unpack there. The first thing that really stood out to me is this idea that has been paradigm changing to me, that you can change beliefs where you're saying or, I believe this or I believe that, I feel this or I feel that, changing that to an and. I can hold these 2 different beliefs or these 2 different feelings at the same time. I can feel angry and I can still love this person.
Yes.
And that just in and of itself is such a game changer, because I would always find myself when I thought the or was the reality, it would stop my healing. It would stop my progress because it was like, well, now there's a problem here that I have to figure out how to resolve before I can move forward. Because I'm
Hmm.
sitting there, I can't hold these two different ideas or these two different beliefs at the same time. And then like to add into that, listening to what those different parts, what their purpose is, what they're trying to do, what they're trying to keep us safe from, or what they're trying
Hmm.
to what their purpose is. And there's
Hmm.
so much, there's just so much value in that. And then I love that you brought in the you called it the true self, right?
Yeah, or the core
Yeah,
self.
the
Hmm.
core self. Yeah. So
The
how
capital S.
do right with a capital S. So in my own experience, even before I think encountered this true self with a capital S within like therapy context, I started to
Hmm.
encounter it during plant medicine,
Right.
specifically with ayahuasca, and I didn't know like
Hmm.
what that part or who that part was. I thought it was like the way that that part appears to me is this particular avatar of Shiva that
Mm.
I had never
Uh-huh.
seen before. I'm not a Hindu, practitioner. I just knew the dancing Shiva. And then this one day, um, I heard a mantra. This was not in the plant medicine space. And I went and I looked up. I said, what is this mantra? And I saw this picture of this avatar of this self that was experiencing in the plant medicine space. And then once I connected those dots, it became a resource for me to use within within my somatic work, within my parts work, that I could call that part in and like have him help and sit with those other parts, the parts that were in pain or the parts that like I was having trouble with. And so like these concepts to me like are just so incredibly powerful because all of that happened organically,
Yeah.
you know. Um the way that I started working with the different parts was like sort of in a back end, right? Like the somatic. Like first it was like, so within
Hmm.
somatic experiencing, the theory is that when we experience trauma, the energy gets stuck and it's sort of living there within
Right.
us and trying to resolve, and that's why we get triggered. And so like the parts work just seemed to make so much sense because it was like, oh, all of a sudden I started to clue in, oh, this part feels different, it doesn't feel like me. And
Hmm.
the magic question that my therapist gave me that like was the game changer was like, how old is this part?
Yes.
And then it was
Yeah.
like that awareness started to be a part of my experience. Oh, this is my 5-year old part, or this is
Hmm.
like my angry teenager, and so how does one begin to start to bring that awareness in?
Mm. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, it's interesting, you mentioned the ayahuasca because I see kind of what I do as I'm kind of this outside agent, kind of like the ayahuasca that helps bring someone into this experience of their parts and helps guide them to allow their parts to step back to experience that self Shiva,
Yeah.
um, part of them that can actually heal them. And then eventually, I think both of those, then the person can then do that on their own. But it's kind of like this
Mm.
aid initially to help them, experience that, so that there's this groundedness of I know that that self exists. I know that it's there, and
Mm.
often I'll describe it like the clouds that are covering the sun, right? If you've ever lived somewhere where it's really overcast all the time and you start to doubt that the sun's even there.
Mm.
But the sun is there, right? But often our parts, our protective parts, are so blended with us, right? That feel so urgent, so anxious, so angry, or whatever it is that they're feeling protective about. So usually the first step for me is just taking a moment, and I'll often tell people start with 30 seconds and just take 30 seconds and observe what's alive in you. And it might be your physical sensations, it might be emotional energy, it might just be watching the thoughts and seeing, kind of what they are and what they're fixated on. Because those are going to be like manifestations basically that are inside of you. But if you can be the witness just for a second, even for 30 seconds, can I just observe what's there? I often say it's like diving into the ocean and looking under the ocean at what's there. It's different every day, and there's different ripples, there's different levels of agitation. But just taking a moment to go in and observe, and there's no fixing, there's just seeing, just observing what's there. That's the first step to me, because the inroad often to self energy is curiosity, which is really the opposite of judgment. So judgment is, I know what this is. This is good, or this is bad, or I'm afraid of it, it's scary, or whatever it is. And so a big question in IFS is, how do I feel toward this? So say you notice something that's coming up in you. It might be a pain in your stomach. Say it's a physical sensation. And you ask yourself, how do I feel toward this? And if the answer is, I'm afraid of it, I hate it, something like that, then what you would do is realize, oh, there's another part that's afraid of this, or that is frustrated with it. So then you would take a step back from that and say, how do I feel toward that? How do I feel toward the part that's afraid of the pain in my stomach? And you might keep taking a step back until you can feel curious, until you can say, I wonder why that is afraid, or I wonder why it's feeling so upset. So as soon as you can have that element of, I want to learn something about this, that's when the self is going to come in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I love that. The curiosity is the opposite of judgment, and the key. And the other thing was just, um, I'm drawing some parallels to Buddhist philosophy.
Mm.
That it's not, again, the and, not the or. That we're really the witness. We're not all the thoughts, but the
Mm-hmm.
thoughts are also part of us. It's not an
Yeah,
either
yeah.
or situation, right? We're not going to fall into this weird nihilist
Mm-hmm.
perspective where there's no reality or there's no self whatsoever. Well, of course there's a self. We're here. We have thoughts. We have the capacity to build and create and love and experience the full gambit of human experience. And yet none
Yeah.
of these are us. There's that witness. There's that true self, you would call it. It's sort of observing everything. And
Mm-hmm.
what a wonderful idea.
Yeah, and it's also, though, what I've experienced with this self is that it's not just a passive witness, though. It's not, initially it can kind of start like that, but eventually again, it's hard to explain, when you use these words, it's really pointing to an experience, but it's this feeling state, or um, energy, I guess, of complete fearlessness. There's a fearless, calm, confident, very compassionate quality to the self, so that it can, and I don't know if that's how you experienced it, with ayahuasca, but it's not afraid of any of the parts that may seem really, scary, because they're angry or they're doing something extreme, or it's not afraid of the parts that hold the pain, and it can actually go in. So eventually, in IFS, there's a beautiful thing where the self goes into these parts that are stuck in past moments and witnesses everything that they experienced, but then also they call it reparenting or redoing,
Yeah.
actually changes the memory, because now there's this younger part and there's this adult self
Mhm.
that's confident and compassionate and can give that younger part everything they needed. I call this time travel because it's like you are traveling back in that moment and now you're with your former self, and then you can retrieve them and bring them back into the present. It's kind of similar to some shamanic practices,
Yeah.
but and then you can do an unburdening ritual where they unburden. And so the self is this, it doesn't just observe, it goes in and it helps and it provides this incredibly healing presence.
Yeah.
um yeah.
Yeah, it's an incredible practice. So that was kind of like how my SE work went into
Mm-hmm.
IFS, was like, okay,
Mm.
now that we've picked up this, what the feeling is, and we've identified, like how old is this part, or like what does this part feel like, what do they want to express? And then she would
Yeah.
say, can you, like, it wasn't even, it was very open. It was like, can you bring in somebody, maybe an angel or a spirit guide, or
Mm-hmm.
some sort of resource? And invariably, my like, I would go to this avatar, this part of
Mm-hmm.
myself, and it was like, I didn't need to think about it. It wasn't like, oh gee, who do I need to bring in? Of course this part needs to come in. Like, of course this is the
Yeah.
purpose of this part, like, is to be there. And just having that self, that part there, just witnessing, is so healing and so calming and so reassuring. And then it was like taking it a step further. What does that part want to say to this little part?
Right.
How does he want to care for him?
Yeah.
Even if it's just like sitting with my little child, and like just letting him play, letting him express,
Yeah.
letting him be who he wants to be, which is just a kid, not a traumatized, individual.
Yeah.
And it's just the witnessing is so powerful. But then, like you're saying, to take that a step further and like use that resource to reparent, or to help
Mm-hmm.
that wounded or that exiled part heal, it's just,
Mm-hmm.
it's such an incredible practice. And
Mm-hmm.
it's this is why I wanted to, have you on, because I really feel like so many people can benefit
Yeah.
from doing this work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it goes to me, it goes to the roots. It
Mm,
goes, we have these protective mechanisms, some would call, or these, protective parts, but usually, or always really, behind them are these more vulnerable parts that it's kind of like, it's like these protective parts are um, a young couple that just had a baby, right? And they're protective of their baby, and their friends say, "Come out and go out karaokeing with us," and they say, "And just leave the baby at home." And they say, "No, no, of course I cannot do that. I
right.
must protect my baby," right? And so it's like these protective parts cannot stop doing their job, whether it's, binging or anything, right? Any kind of addictive behavior, rage, perfectionism, whatever it is, people pleasing, whatever these parts, they can't stop doing it until whatever they're protecting is healed. So that's what I love about IFS, is that it's not just managing these parts and trying to get them to relax, and it's actually, and it's not shaming them, right? It's
Yeah,
understanding that they're
right.
doing that for a reason. And
Yeah.
and but once we can go and figure out, once we befriend them, like, we befriend that addictive part and we say, "Oh, you must be doing this for a reason." what if I could go and help you with what you're protecting? Then they'll reveal, like you said, these younger parts. They'll tell you exactly what age they are, you
Yeah.
know, and what they're stuck in, and then we can go and be with them and give them what they did there that they needed, which is sometimes, like you said, just someone to see them and hear them and value them and reflect back that they are worthy, you know? And the self can do
Yeah.
that. So what I love in my own work is that once I know a person is in self, which is by those qualities, you know, and maybe we've asked several of the other parts to relax back and their self emerges. As the facilitator, I can just step back and say, do whatever you feel compelled to do or
Mm.
say, you know, with that younger part. And I just get to uh, observe this beautiful work because once a person's in self, there's absolute clarity about, you know, what to do.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned just again the lack of shaming, the
Yeah.
acknowledgement, and even being able to thank these parts of us that like we've spent so much time trying to get away from, having, you know, that you mentioned the inner critic, like being critical within our heads about, but reframing that and being like, oh wow, you really had a job to do, and you've been
Yeah.
doing this job the whole time, and
Yeah.
thank you for doing that job, thank you for keeping me safe, and
Mm-hmm.
now let's have a conversation about how we're not in danger anymore, or we have the
Right.
resources to deal with this in a different way. And like, and again, it's not like you need to go, like you're done here. It's just like, thanks for doing your job, now take a rest. You know,
Yeah.
you can join
Or
the family.
yeah, often when those protective parts are, you know, when whatever they're protecting is healed, they'll take on a totally different job, often, or sometimes their job will just not be burdened anymore, right? They won't have this angst of I have to do this or else. It'll just be
Mm,
a supportive role. But often the critic becomes a cheerleader, you know, and is my one of my critics, I have a couple, but one of my critics was just a tormentor to me, and and that was a huge shift in my system once I was able to befriend that critic and understand that she was trying to criticize me inside so that I wouldn't receive the criticism and the punishment outside, and that she
mm,
was doing this very important job. And so she's pretty much, you know, unburdened now, but what she'll do is whenever she kind of creeps up, I realize that she's pointing at another part. What she's
mm,
critical of is another part that she thinks is extreme and is going to get us in trouble. And so what I'll do is I'll turn to my critic and I'll say, "Ooh, I see you rising up. What are you afraid of?" And she'll say, "That part is taking over and it's really going to mess us up and get us, you know, criticized and make us look like a fool or whatever." And I'll say, "Okay, can I go and help that part?" And she'll say, "Oh, yes, please, please, please help her." You know, and then I'll go to the other part and say, "Okay, what's going on for you? Why are you acting in this extreme way?" And then find out what she's protecting, help that. So it really becomes a lot of times the protective parts end up calling on the self and saying, "Hey, self, there's a problem." It's like little children calling on the parent, you know, "Hey, there's a
mm.
problem over here. Can you please come help?" You know, so because they're
Wow.
usually young too, the
Right. Yeah,
protective
there.
parts.
Yeah, I think that's an important like distinction to make, is like a lot of those parts are really young, and for
Hmm.
me that's a part of that forgiveness and that acceptance process, is like,
Yeah.
hey, that part didn't realize, like didn't have the resources or the faculties to realize that this wasn't like a life-threatening situation. You know,
Yeah.
now as an older person, I can understand that, I can like go back and reparent like you said, but like these parts, that's to me part of the forgiveness and the acceptance of those protectors, is like, you're keeping me alive, You know,
Right.
that's your job, is not only to keep me safe, but to keep me from danger, to keep me
Mm-hmm.
alive. And like, thank you so much for doing that. And I love that you brought in that concept that the parts can take different roles once we've like sort of
Mm-hmm.
fixed our relationship with them. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's such an important concept that like the things that we look at as negative qualities can become strengths, can
Yeah.
become like can become really important parts of ourselves, you know, when they're given a new task and a new job. So I
Mm-hmm.
love that. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're always benevolent in the sense that they're feeling extreme, but they're pointing you towards something that needs to be healed. So
Yeah.
whenever there's a trigger, we say, you know, whenever there's some extreme emotion or fear, we can always, if we can, move toward it and discover if we're curious, right? If we're open toward it, we can find what it is there that needs to be helped. So kind of like what you were saying, if there's some any kind of intense emotion, right? Whether it's panic, anger, sadness, whatever it is, if we can go toward it and even just ask, like what your SE therapist said, how old are you? Right? And it's
Yeah.
I know it sounds funny to some people, but if you can not think about it, there's no thinking about it. It's just like receiving an answer from another person. You just get in touch with that emotion. Sometimes I'll if the emotion is blended, it's what we say in IFS. If it just feels like so overwhelming, it's so part of you, you can say, "Hey, can you just back up just a little so that I can be with you? I want to
Mm.
be with you." And it's incredible, and there will be an immediate relief in my body. And for me, I'll often see the part in front of me. Not everyone sees it, but you might just experience a shift of the energy in front of you,
Yeah.
and I'll say, usually I'll see myself frantic, or sometimes I won't see it. I'll just feel the energy in front of me, and I'll say, how old are you? And I've gotten everything from infant to adulthood, you know,
Yeah.
but that helps me know how to comfort that part, because it's very different to comfort an infant versus a 5-year-old or an
Mm.
8-year-old or a teenager, you know.
That's a good
So
point. Yeah.
even just that, it can be so powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. So okay, so just to kind of summarize some of the vital points that we talked about today: curiosity rather than judgment,
Mm.
the fact that this true self is always here with us, even when we can't feel it. Just like the sun is always there behind the clouds, and I love that metaphor. And
Mm-hmm.
that all of these parts they have a job, and when oftentimes the parts that are unintegrated are there trying to protect us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, I feel like we could have a much longer conversation about this, and I would love
Yeah.
to have you back on and continue.
Yeah. Love
Yeah.
to.
So, Christine, where can people learn about a little bit more about your work or about IFS
Mhm.
if they're interested in working with you?
Yeah. So I have a website. It's theordinarysacred.com. And of course my Instagram, the underscore ordinary underscore sacred. And so I do work one-on-one with people. My schedule is fairly limited right now, but there is a way to sign up for that on my website if you'd like. And then I also have um, these beautiful IFS support groups that meet every week, and where people come and we do exercises together. I'll often take a volunteer and do some IFS work with them. And then people can just share about their own inner family system and what's happening for them. That happens every Tuesday. I have two different groups. And there's a link in my bio if you want to sign up for that. It's $20 a month, so it's pretty affordable. And then I also offer free workshops every month. So this month's will be March 11th, Friday, March 11th, at 10 a.m. Central Time. And this one is going to be about self-compassion from an IFS lens and just kind of understanding the parts of us that might block us from that self-compassion, because as I said, I think that self-compassion is part of who we truly are. But there can be parts that because of certain experiences found out that it wasn't safe to love ourselves or to have our own agency. So that's March 11th. And I have, different IFS resources and courses and things on my website.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast, and more importantly, for doing the work that you're doing. It's so important, and there's so much potential for healing and growth within it.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you and the content that you put out on Instagram, and so grateful that we've been able to connect.
Yes, I really appreciate you. My part, felt on the outside like no one wanted to hear and see her gets excited when people want to hear from me. So.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm happy
Thank
that
you.
part can be happy and joyful.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, and like I said, I would love to do this again. So thank you so much, Christine.
Yeah, I would love
I
to.
really
Just let me
appreciate
know.
it. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you,
thanks
Jonathan.
everybody thank you, Christine, for being on the podcast. Thanks everybody for joining us live. And if you're checking this out on the replay, go ahead and leave a review or a like for the podcast. It really helps push the algorithm up. We're starting to get up there. This is our 23rd episode, so we're chugging along here. So appreciate everybody, and hope to see you again on another episode of The Vital Point. Thanks, everyone.
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks for checking out another episode of the podcast. I hope that you not only enjoyed it, but that you feel inspired to go and do some practice of your own. Whether that is something that is a part of your regular routine, like meditation or breath work, or trying something new, like taking an ice bath or starting a new mindset practice. Maybe you feel curious to something that you've been called to try, working with a new teacher, a new facilitator, or maybe even working with psychedelics or plant medicine in whatever way is safe and legal for you where you live. My hope is that you are, curious and continue to expand your transformational practice, and that this podcast inspires you to continue doing that. As always, if you can follow or subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're listening to it on, it definitely helps. And if you can leave a review, even just a few reviews really help to push the podcast up in the algorithm and help make it more visible to more people. I'd love it if you shared it with your friends if you're finding it valuable or interesting. As always, follow me at Blue Magic Alchemy on Instagram, all one word. And if you're interested in learning more about breathwork, or you'd like support integrating or preparing for self-development and transformational practice, reach out to me at bluemagicalchemy@gmail.com or at Instagram to set up a discovery call for Instagram coaching. Until next time, thank you, be well, and keep practicing. That's the vital